In the stillness between shifts, the world reveals its hidden machinery. The sounds we ignore by daylight become, in the dark, a kind of music. Tonight, we step into the quiet hours of a night's watch steward at Castle Black. Settle into the stillness. Let your bed hold you softly. Let your thoughts grow quiet and distant. Let the last of your effort melt away. This is canon and calm. Let us begin. The wall is a presence that never truly sleeps. A barrier of ice 700 feet high, weeping in the day and freezing in the late hour. Here at Castle Black, the wind has a particular way of whistling through the gaps in the timber, a thin piping note that follows me through the corridors. My boots, worn thin at the soles, make a dull thud against the packed earth and stone as I move through my rounds. I carry a single tallow candle, its flame dancing in the draught, casting long, wavering shapes against the walls. The wax drips slowly, cooling into white ridges against my knuckles, a small, biting heat that reminds me I am still awake while the rest of the Brotherhood dreams. There is a specific peace to be found in these hours, away from the clatter of training swords and the gruff shouts of the morning drill. In the common hall, the great hearth has burned down to a bed of glowing embers, pulsing with a faint orange heart. I take up the iron poker, its handle cold and pitted from decades of use, and stir the coals until they spark. The smell of charred pine and old soot rises to meet me, a familiar dry scent that has permeated every fiber of my black wool cloak. I add 2 fresh logs, seasoned oak from the haunted forest, watching as the heat licks at the bark. The wood hisses, releasing a pocket of sap that pops with a sharp, clear crack in the silence. It is my task to ensure the fire never truly dies, for a cold hall is a bitter place to wake, and the brothers of the watch have enough bitterness in their bones. Moving toward the kitchens, the temperature drops, the warmth of the hall replaced by the sharp, metallic bite of the larder. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters, sage and rosemary and thyme, their fragrance muted by the chill. I run my hand along the rough burlap of a grain sack, feeling the individual kernels shift beneath my touch like dry river silt. The copper kettles are lined up along the stone counter, polished to a dull sheen that catches the flicker of my candle. I fill the largest one with water from the barrel, the liquid pouring with a hollow, resonant splash that echoes in the vaulted ceiling. It is a slow process, filling the pots for the morning meal, but there is a comfort in the repetition, a way to mark the passing of the hours. I find myself in the library vault next, where the scent of old parchment and leather bindings is so thick it almost has a taste. Thousands of scrolls, some dating back to the time of the first men, rest on shelves of black iron and weirwood. My fingers trace the spines, feeling the texture of cracked calfskin and the smooth, cold face of lead seals. Maester Aemon has left a stack of letters on his desk, the ink dry, but the words still carrying the weight of distant kingdoms. I move them carefully, placing a small stone weight atop the pile to keep them from fluttering in the draught. The silence here is different than the silence outside. It is a layered thing, built from centuries of recorded thought and forgotten history. In the corner of the vault, a small oil lamp flickers, its reservoir nearly empty. I refill it with a steady hand, the clear oil shimmering in the light before I trim the wick with a pair of brass shears. The small metallic snip is the only noise in the room, a tiny punctuation mark in the ongoing story of the watch. I step back out into the courtyard, where the moon hangs like a pale coin above the rim of the wall. The ice glows with an inner light, a shimmering blue-white radiance that seems to pull the stars closer to the earth. My breath blooms in the atmosphere, a white cloud that lingers for a second before the wind carries it away toward the trees. Across the yard, the armory stands silent, the racks of spears and shields looking like sleeping giants in the half-light. I check the latch on the door, ensuring the iron bolt is thrown against the wind that howls down from the north. The metal is so cold it sticks to my skin for a brief, stinging moment, a reminder of the true enemy that waits beyond the gate. I climb the wooden stairs toward the rookery, the timber creaking under my weight with a series of slow, complaining groans. The ravens stir in their cages as I enter, a rustle of black feathers and the soft clicking noise of beaks against wire. They are restless tonight, perhaps sensing the change in the weather or the weight of the messages they carry in their sleep. I offer them a handful of dried corn, the kernels clicking against the wooden floorboards as they peck at the grain. Their eyes, small and dark, reflect the candle flame as they watch me with a strange, unblinking intelligence. To be a steward is to care for the small things, the birds and the fires and the bread, so that the rangers may focus on the horizon. In the Lord Commander's quarters, the air is still and smells of old cedar and beeswax. I move through the room with practiced ease, straightening the furs on the bed and clearing the remains of a late supper. A single cup of mulled wine sits on the table, the spices having settled into a dark, fragrant sludge at the bottom. I take the tray down to the washroom, the stone floor here damp and slick with the condensation of the evening. The water in the basin is skimmed with a thin layer of ice, which I break with the side of my thumb. It shatters with a delicate glass-like tinkle, the shards spinning in the dark water like tiny frozen stars. There is a ledger in the storehouse that needs my attention, its pages filled with the mundane mathematics of survival. How many barrels of salt beef remain? How many sacks of flour? How many bundles of arrows in the reserve? I dip my quill into the inkpot, the nib scratching across the paper with a dry, rhythmic hiss that fills the small room. Each entry is a promise made to the future, a way of ensuring that the Brotherhood will endure another month of the long cold. The ink is black and thick, staining my fingers as I work, a mark of my office that no amount of scrubbing ever truly removes. I count the tallies twice, my mind moving through the numbers with a slow, deliberate focus that pushes back the fatigue. Outside, the shadow of the wall stretches across the castle, a long, dark finger that points toward the south. It is a reminder of what we protect, the green lands and the warm fires of people who will never know our names. We are the shadows that stand before the light, the quiet workers who keep the machine of the watch turning in the dimness. I return to the kitchens to check on the fire there, the heat from the ovens beginning to seep into the stone walls. The first loaves of bread are rising in their tins, the dough pale and soft under the linen cloths. I can smell the yeast, a sweet, earthy scent that promises the coming of the dawn and the end of my shift. I take a moment to sit on a wooden bench, my back resting against the warm masonry of the chimney. The fatigue is a weighted blanket now, pressing down on my shoulders and slowing the pace of my heart. I close my eyes for a heartbeat, listening to the pulse of the castle, the distant howl of a wolf, and the steady, quiet drip of melting ice from the eaves. The warmth of the chimney bricks remains on my skin for a few moments, a brief memory of comfort as I step back into the stone hallway. My boots make a dull, muffled thud on the packed earth, the frost having hardened the ground into something resembling iron. I carry a small lantern, its flame dancing behind the glass panes, casting long, wearing shadows that climb the walls like spindly fingers. The armory is my next destination, a place of cold metal and the sharp, biting scent of linseed oil. I push open the door, and the hinges give a low, mournful groan that echoes through the quiet space. Inside, the rows of longswords and axes stand like frozen sentinels, their steel faces catching the amber glow of my light. It is a place of utility, where the tools of the Brotherhood are kept ready for a struggle that never truly ends. I find the whetstone near the back, its surface worn into a gentle curve by decades of use. There is a pile of daggers on the workbench, their edges dulled by training or the relentless damp of the northern climate. I pick one up, feeling the balance of the hilt, the cold weight of the pommel resting against my palm. I begin the slow, methodical work of sharpening, the stone rasping against the steel in a steady, measured pulse. Each stroke is deliberate, a quiet conversation between the stone and the blade. I can feel the minute imperfections in the metal, the tiny nicks and burrs that must be smoothed away. The oil helps the blade glide, creating a thin, shimmering film that protects the steel from the creeping rust. It is a task that requires patience, a focus on the present moment that allows the rest of the castle to fade into the background. Beyond the workbench, the racks of shields are stacked high against the timber walls. Most are painted a uniform black, the color of our order, though the paint is often chipped and scarred. I run my hand over the rough wood of a heater shield, feeling the grain and the indentations left by some forgotten training session. These are the barriers between our men and the cold, unknown, simple things made of oak and hide, yet vital to our survival. I move to the next blade, the repetition of the work becoming a form of meditation. The atmosphere here is different from the kitchen, more austere and focused on the grim realities of the frontier. There is no smell of bread or yeast, only the metallic tang of the forge and the earthy scent of the stone walls. I work through the pile until every dagger is keen enough to bite, their points gleaming like shards of ice in the lantern light. Leaving the armory, I make my way toward the rookery, the spiral stairs winding upward into the chill of the higher levels. The stone steps are narrow and uneven, worn smooth by the feet of countless stewards who came before me. My breath begins to cloud in front of my face, a pale mist that vanishes into the dimness of the stairwell. I can hear the soft, restless stirring of the ravens above, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a floor. In the rookery, the climate is even sharper, the wind whistling through the narrow slats of the windows. The ravens are large and intelligent, their feathers a deep, iridescent black that seems to absorb the light. They watch me with clever, sideways glances, their heads tilting as I approach the grain bins. I speak to them in a low murmur, a habit born of long nights spent in their company when they are the only ones awake to hear. I scoop a handful of corn and dried meat, scattering it into the troughs with a soft, rhythmic clatter. The birds descend in a flurry of wings, their talons clicking against the wood as they jostle for the best morsels. One bird, larger than the rest, stays on its perch, watching me with a gaze that feels uncomfortably perceptive. It is said that these birds remember everything they see, carrying the secrets of the watch in their silent, feathered heads. I stand by the window for a moment, looking out at the immense wall of ice that dominates the northern horizon. In the late hour, it is a pale, ghostly blue, a frozen wave that seems to hang suspended in the sky. It is measureless and silent, a monument to a forgotten age and a defense against things that most men believe are only myths. The scale of it always makes me feel small, a tiny point of warmth in a landscape of eternal winter. Descending from the rookery, I cross the courtyard toward the shield hall, the snow crunching under my boots with a crisp, brittle noise. The hall is empty now, the long tables standing in the shadow like the skeletons of great beasts. This is where the brothers gather to eat and to remember their fallen, the walls hung with the shields of those who have finished their watch. In the quiet hours, the room feels full of ghosts, a heavy presence of history that presses against the stone. I walk the length of the hall, my lantern illuminating the high rafters and the soot-stained banners. The air here is stale and carries the faint, lingering scent of roasted meat and old wood smoke. I check the hearth, making sure the embers are safely banked for the morning, the orange glow reflecting in the polished wood of the high table. It is a place of brotherhood, but tonight it is only a cavern of silence. Near the entrance stand the statues of past Lord Commanders, their features carved in rough, weather-beaten stone. They are stern figures, their eyes fixed on a point far beyond the walls of this castle. I pause before the likeness of a man whose name has been lost to time, his stone cloak draped in folds that look almost real in the flickering light. We are all just links in a long, cold chain, each of us doing our part to keep the watch from breaking. I take a small cruet of oil from my belt and begin to refill the wall lamps that line the inner corridor. The liquid is golden and viscous, flowing into the reservoirs with a soft glugging sound. I trim the wicks with a pair of iron shears, ensuring that the flame will burn steady and bright throughout the remaining hours. It is a simple chore, but one that provides a sense of order and safety in the murk of the castle. My path takes me toward the inner gate, where the massive timbers are reinforced with bands of black iron. The wood is cold to the touch, the moisture in the grain having frozen into tiny, sparkling crystals. I check the heavy bolts, sliding them back and forth to ensure they move freely in their tracks. The mechanism is simple and sturdy, built to withstand the pressure of 1,000 winters and the weight of the ice above. In the storehouse nearby, I spend some time sorting through the winter furs, checking for signs of damp or moths. The pelts are thick and laden with the scent of cedar and old leather, a comforting animal warmth that clings to my fingers. I fold the cloaks with care, stacking them in neat piles that will be distributed to the men on the wall tomorrow. Each one is a vital piece of equipment, a shield against the biting wind that can steal a man's life in a single hour. I find a small tear in the hem of a scout's mantle, the wool frayed and pulled apart by some stray branch. I sit on a crate and pull a needle and a length of waxed thread from my pouch, the metal cool against my skin. The work is delicate, my fingers moving with a slow, practiced tempo as I pull the stitches tight. The thread is strong and black, blending into the fabric until the wound is healed and the cloak is whole again. There is a peculiar satisfaction in this kind of repair, a sense of fixing what is broken and making it useful once more. The world outside may be falling into ruin, but here, in the dimness of the storehouse, I can maintain a small pocket of order. The needle clicks against the thimble, a tiny domestic sound that feels out of place in a fortress of warriors. Yet, without the needle, the sword would soon find itself held by a man too frozen to swing it. I finish the repair and set the cloak aside, my eyes beginning to feel the strain of the low light. I decide to walk toward the tunnel entrance, the most vulnerable and vital part of our defenses. The temperature drops as I approach, the warmth of the inhabited buildings replaced by a raw, biting chill that comes from the heart of the wall. The tunnel is a long, dark throat of ice and stone, a passage that leads into the wild lands beyond. I stop at the first iron gate, the bars coated in a thick layer of white rime that looks like frozen lace. I reach out and touch the metal, my skin sticking slightly to the sub-zero surface before I pull away. The silence here is absolute, a profound, weighted stillness that seems to vibrate in the ears. It is the silence of the deep ice, a soundless weight that has existed for thousands of years and will exist long after I am gone. I turn back toward the main keep, the fatigue returning to my limbs like a rising tide. My shift is not yet over, but the most demanding tasks are behind me, leaving only the quiet observation of the late hours. I will return to the solar to finish the remaining tallies, my mind drifting toward the thought of a warm bed and the eventual rising of the sun. The castle breathes around me, a slow, icy respiration that marks the passage of another night on the edge of the world. The stairs back to the solar are narrow and steep, winding upward through the heart of the keep. My boots make a dull, muffled thud against the stone, a solitary note in the sleeping fortress. Each step feels weighted, a reminder of the hours already spent traversing these frigid corridors. I reach the landing and pause for a moment, letting the fatigue in my legs ebb away. The chill here is less aggressive, tempered by the stout walls and the distant dying embers of the great hall below. A faint scent of wood smoke persists, a ghost of the evening's fire that still clings to the stones. Inside the solar, the candle has burned low, its flame dancing in a draught I cannot feel. I take my seat once more, the wood creaking under my weight, a familiar, welcoming groan. The table is a landscape of shadows, with only the immediate circle of light revealing the tasks that remain. There are still 3 ledgers to examine, their covers bound in cracked pigskin that feels like dry earth. I pull the first one toward me, the parchment rustling with a dry, papery whisper that fills the small room. The edges are yellowed, curled by the touch of countless hands that have come before mine. This book contains the records of the grain stores, a vital tally of what remains to feed us through the coming months. I dip my quill into the inkwell, the dark liquid clinging to the nib, ready to mark the passage of our supplies. The ink is chilled, a small detail that somehow makes the task feel more urgent. My eyes trace the columns of figures, the handwriting of my predecessor, a cramped, precise script that speaks of decades spent in this very chair. It is a quiet legacy, written in the margins of survival, a history of flour and salt and dried peas. I add my own marks, the nib scratching against the grain of the paper. I find an error in the count of salted beef, a small discrepancy that requires a cross-reference with the cellar logs. I sigh, a soft sound that barely stirs the atmosphere, and reach for the secondary volume. This one is larger, laden with the damp smell of the lower vaults where it is usually kept. The work is slow and meticulous, requiring a focus that pushes the frost to the periphery of my mind. Each number represents a meal, a day of strength for a brother on the wall, a small victory against the hunger that always waits. I calculate the remaining bushels of barley, my mind moving through the math with a steady cadence. Outside, the wind begins to howl, a mournful, high-pitched whistle that finds the gaps in the window shutters. I ignore the noise, focusing instead on the texture of the page and the steady, measured movement of my hand. The tally must be perfect, for a mistake in winter is a mistake that cannot be undone. The ink dries slowly in the dampness, leaving a faint, metallic scent that mingles with the smell of old tallow. I blow gently on the wet marks, watching the sheen disappear as the pigment sinks into the fibers of the sheet. 142 barrels of flour remain, a number that feels both large and terrifyingly small. After an hour, the grain ledgers are complete, and I close them with a soft, final thud. My fingers are stained with black, a temporary mark of my labor that will wash away with the morning's first basin of water. I lean back, the wooden chair supporting my spine as I close my eyes for a few heartbeats. I stand and stretch, my joints popping in the stillness, a series of sharp, small reports like snapping twigs. The solar feels smaller now, the shadows pressing inward as the candle reaches the end of its life. I snuff the wick, and the room is plunged into a dimness that is only broken by the faint grey light from the window. I decide to visit the library, a place where the silence is even deeper, and the atmosphere is dense with the scent of dust and wisdom. It is a long walk through the drafty corridors, but the movement helps to keep the drowsiness at bay. My lantern casts a long swinging beam ahead of me, illuminating the frost on the walls. The library door is a massive slab of oak, its iron hinges long overdue for a coating of grease. I push it open, and the groan of the metal echoes through the hallway, a loud, complaining voice in the quiet hours. The noise feels like a transgression, a disruption of the peace that lives among the books. Inside, the shelves rise up into the gloom, row upon row of books and scrolls that have survived for centuries. I carry my lantern high, the light spilling over the spines of leather and wood, illuminating titles that have not been read in a lifetime. The smell of old glue and decaying vellum is heavy and comforting. I'm looking for a specific map, a chart of the tunnels that run beneath the castle like a web of frozen veins. There are rumors of a blockage in one of the lower galleries, a collapse that could compromise our internal movements. I move through the stacks, my footsteps light on the time-worn boards. The floorboards here are uneven, warped by the weight of the knowledge they carry and the creeping damp of the north. I walk with care, my lantern swinging in a slow, hypnotic arc that casts long, flickering shadows against the stacks. The silence is absolute, a profound stillness that feels almost physical. I find the map chest in a corner, its lid covered in a fine grey powder that rises in a cloud as I lift the latch. The hinges here are silent, a small mercy in a late hour filled with the noises of a decaying fortress. I reach inside, my fingers brushing against rolls of parchment that feel like dried skin. The maps are rolled tight, the parchment stiff and brittle with age, threatening to crack if handled with anything but the utmost gentleness. I select a bundle tied with a frayed blue ribbon, the color of a summer sky that I can barely remember. It is a delicate thing, a relic of a time when the world felt larger. I spread the sheet across a reading table, the plane of the wood scarred by the knives and pens of 1,000 nameless stewards. The ink on the map is faded, a pale brown that traces the outlines of the landscape as it was seen 500 years ago. The detail is incredible, every small stream and rocky outcrop recorded with care. My thumb follows the line of the wall, a bold, unwavering stroke that divides the known from the unknown. It is a strange feeling to hold the geometry of this place in my hands, to see the scale of our burden laid out in ink and hide. The wall is a mile of ice, a barrier that has stood for thousands of years. I find the gallery I was looking for, a narrow passage marked with a series of small, precise runes. The ink here is smudged, as if a finger had rested on this spot for a long time, perhaps belonging to a man who shared my current concerns. The blockage is near the wormways, a deep part of the castle that few ever visit. The quiet of the library is different from the silence of the tunnel. It is a full, expectant quiet, as if the books themselves are waiting for someone to listen. I roll the map back up, the parchment crackling like a small fire between my palms. I secure the blue ribbon, a small knot that holds a piece of history in place. I leave the library, the door clicking shut behind me with a soft, decisive snap that marks the end of my errand. The hallway is darker now, the torches having burned down to nothing but smouldering nubs of pitch and wood. I navigate by memory, my feet finding the familiar patterns in the stone floor. I make my way toward the kitchens, the promise of a small, warm hearth and a cup of herb tea drawing me forward. The kitchen is the heart of the castle, even after dark, a place where the ghost of warmth still persists. The atmosphere here is different, carrying the faint, lingering scent of roasted meat and onions. The large iron stoves are cool to the touch, but the heat from the day's baking still radiates from the stones of the hearth. I find a small kettle and fill it with water from the barrel, the splash of the liquid a bright, clear tone in the dimness. The water is icy, drawn from the deep well that never freezes. I set the kettle on the embers, blowing softly until a small orange glow wakes up to lick at the metal bottom. The light is tiny, but it feels immense in the surrounding gloom, a flickering spark of domesticity in a land of ice. I watch the smoke rise, a thin grey ribbon that disappears into the chimney. While the water heats, I sit on a low stool and watch the shadows dance across the ceiling, their shapes shifting and merging like the memories of a dream. The fatigue is a physical weight now, a heavy pressure that pulls at my shoulders and neck. I let my head rest against the chilled stone wall, just for a moment. The kettle begins to hum, a low, rising note that signals the approach of a boil. I pull a handful of dried mint from a jar, the scent sharp and clean, a brief reminder of green fields and sunlight. The leaves are brittle, crumbling between my fingers into a fine, fragrant powder. I pour the water over the leaves, the steam rising in a white plume that warms my face and softens the dry ache in my throat. The first sip is hot and bitter, but it carries a warmth that spreads through my chest and down into my frozen toes. It is a simple pleasure, but in this place, simple pleasures are the most profound. This is the quietest part of my shift, the hour when the environment seems to hold its breath before the first grey light of dawn. I sit in the kitchen, a lone steward in a fortress of ghosts, and find a moment of peace in the simple act of drinking tea. The shadows are long, but they are not unkind. The castle remains still. The only noise the occasional pop of the dying fire and the distant muffled beat of the wind against the stones. I am a small part of a much larger machine, a single stitch in the great black cloak that protects the realms of men. My work is humble, but it is necessary. I finish my tea and set the cup aside, the warmth of the liquid persisting in my belly like a small internal sun. It is time to return to my rounds, to check the gates and the stables one last time before the morning watch arrives to relieve me. The night is long, but it is finally beginning to yield. The transition from the kitchen's warmth to the corridor's chill is a sharp, bracing shock that clears the remaining cobwebs from my mind. I walk toward the armory, my lantern held steady as I move through the silent ranks of practice dummies and weapon racks. The steel is freezing, a forest of blades waiting for the morning light. I check the locks on the armory doors, the metal bolts sliding into place with a solid, reassuring click. Everything is in its proper place. The shields hanging in neat rows, the spears bundled together like sheaves of iron wheat. Order is our best defense against the chaos that lives beyond the wall. My path takes me past the stables, where the horses shift in their sleep, their breath rising in white clouds that catch the light of my lantern. The smell of hay and manure is pungent here, a warm animal scent that feels grounded and real. I check the sturdy latch on the main door, ensuring it is secure against the wind. One of the Garan horses whinnies softly as I pass, a low, questioning sound that breaks the stillness. I pause to stroke its nose, the velvet skin warm against my numbed palm. We are all huddled together here, man and beast alike, seeking shelter from the relentless winter of the north. The courtyard is an open expanse of grey stone and white snow, the sky above a deep velvet blue that is starting to pale at the edges. The stars are still bright, but their light feels distant and biting, like diamonds scattered on a floor of glass. I take a deep breath, the chill burning my lungs. I walk toward the base of the wall, the immense structure of ice looming over me like a frozen wave. It is so large that it defies comprehension, a monument to a time when men built things that lasted for eternity. I stand in its shadow, feeling small and insignificant in the face of such power. The winch for the cage is silent now, the sturdy ropes coated in ice that sparkles in the starlight. I check the tension of the lines, my hands moving with a practiced ease that comes from years of repetition. The cage is our only way up, a fragile link between the ground and the summit of the landscape. I turn away from the wall and head back toward the main keep, the first hints of dawn starting to touch the horizon. My shift is nearly done, but there is one final task to attend to before I can rest. The stairs to the rookery are the next challenge, a climb that will take me higher into the biting wind and the company of the birds. The winding stone steps are uneven and worn, shaped by the passage of thousands of boots over hundreds of years. I ascend with a measured pace, my breath hitching slightly in the freezing atmosphere of the tower. The spiral of the masonry is tight, the cold granite pressing close against my shoulders as I climb higher into the spire. My lantern casts long dancing shadows that leap across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating the moss that clings to the damp crevices. Each step is a deliberate choice, a quiet movement in the stillness of the late hour. I can feel the moisture on the walls, a thin film of ice that never truly melts, even in the height of summer. The chill here is different, sharper and more focused than the biting wind in the open courtyard. It nibbles at my fingers, stinging the skin even through the thick boiled wool of my protective gloves. I reach the summit, where the environment changes, filled with the pungent scent of musk and old feathers. The ravens are awake, their black eyes catching the amber glint of my flickering flame. They do not caw or cry out, but offer only a soft murmur of recognition as I enter their domain. It is a private language, shared between the birds and those who tend them in the dimness of the keep. I move toward the grain bins, the wooden lids creaking with a dry groan as I lift them. The grain is parched and dusty, a sharp contrast to the pervasive dampness of the surrounding stone. I scatter a generous handful into each trough, the noise of the seeds like falling rain against the hollow timber. The birds descend from their perches, their wings beating a soft tempo in the confined space of the rookery. Their feathers are like pieces of polished onyx, reflecting the warm glow of the lantern in iridescent flashes of purple and blue. I watch them for a moment, marveling at their resilience in this harsh, unforgiving landscape. They are the messengers of the realm, carrying words of war and peace across the frozen miles of the north. To them, the massive wall is merely a convenient perch between two horizons of white. I turn my attention to the scrolls, the parchment feeling brittle and dry in the biting cold. Some are sealed with the grey wax of Winterfell, while others bear the golden lion of King's Landing. I do not read the contents, for that is the maester's duty, but I ensure they are organized and shielded from the frost. Each cylinder of paper is a weighted secret, a voice from a place I may never see with my own eyes. The inkwell on the small writing desk is frozen solid, a black mirror of ice caught in a ceramic cup. I breathe on it, the warmth of my lungs creating a small, shimmering patch of liquid. It is a slow process, a quiet battle against the elements that define our very existence on the edge of the known. I find a spare quill, its tip worn and frayed from years of diligent service in the name of the watch. I note the time of my visit in the logbook, the letters appearing sprawling and shaky in the intense chill. The paper is rough under my hand, a tactile reminder of the mundane work that remains to be done. There is a profound comfort in these records, a sense of continuity that stretches back through the long generations of men. We are but a single link in a chain that spans many centuries of service. Beyond the wooden slats of the narrow windows, the landscape is a study in monochrome. The grey of the stone meets the white of the snow, with only the deep blue of the sky providing a hint of colour. The stars are starting to fade, their brilliance dimmed by the slow approach of the morning light. It is the most peaceful hour, when the evening is at its deepest and the morning is yet to arrive. I check the iron fastenings on the cages, the metal cold enough to sear the skin if I were to touch it directly. Everything is secure, the birds resting once more after their midnight meal. I take a final look around the small room, ensuring no candles are left burning near the dry straw. Safety is a constant concern in a place built of old wood and forgotten history. The descent is easier on my lungs, though I must still watch my footing on the slick stone of the stairs. I move past the maester's quarters, where the smell of dried lavender and sage remains in the hallway. It is a medicinal scent, a hint of healing and knowledge in a fortress of iron and ice. I walk quietly, not wishing to disturb the old man's hard-earned rest before the sun rises. My path leads me toward the library, a place of profound silence and long shadows. The doors are massive, made of ironwood and reinforced with thick steel bands that have rusted over the years. They groan as I push them open, a low note that echoes through the empty, vaulted hall. The atmosphere inside is perfectly still, the smell of old leather and dust-laden paper filling my senses. The shelves rise up into the murk, row upon row of books that contain the entire history of the Seven Kingdoms. Many are so old that their titles have faded, leaving only the texture of the animal hide binding. I walk between the stacks, my lantern illuminating the spines of volumes written by men who have been dust for 1,000 years. It is a cathedral of thought, a sanctuary for the mind in a land of swords. I find the ledger I need, a large book bound in cracked brown hide that smells of smoke and age. It contains the inventory of our winter stores, the count of every barrel of salted pork and sack of grain. I lay it out on a scarred reading table, the wood marked by the knives of bored brothers from eras past. The flickering light makes the numbers dance across the yellowed page. I count the entries carefully, my finger tracing the lines of faded ink. We have enough to last the season, provided the snows do not persist for too many months. It is a delicate balance, a calculation of survival that we perform every year as the light fails. I add a small note in the margin, my handwriting improving as my hands finally thaw in the sheltered room. The candle on the table is burning low, the wax forming a pool of white liquid that looks like spilled milk. I watch a single drop travel down the side, a slow descent that mirrors my own progress through the shift. There is no hurry here, only the steady pace of duty and the quiet passage of time. The library is a place where the seconds feel like minutes, and the minutes like hours. I think of the men who sat at this very table hundreds of years ago, perhaps reading these same words. They faced the same cold, the same isolation, and the same heavy duty that we carry today. Their names are recorded in these books, but their spirits are felt in the very stones of the keep. We are never truly alone when we stand at the edge of the landscape. I close the ledger, the sound of the cover hitting the table like a muffled drumbeat in the quiet hall. I return it to its place on the shelf, ensuring it is aligned perfectly with the others in the row. Order is a shield against the creeping chaos that lives in the wild places beyond our gates. I take a moment to simply stand in the stillness, listening to the heartbeat of the castle. The frost on the high windows has formed intricate patterns, like the leaves of a silver forest frozen in time. I touch the glass, the cold vibrating through my fingertip and up my arm. Outside, the first grey light is touching the top of the wall, a pale crown for the King of Ice. The change is coming, the transition from one watch to the next as the stars retreat. I pick up my lantern and head back toward the main corridor, the light throwing long shadows ahead of me. There are still a few tasks to complete before I can seek the warmth of my own bunk. The kitchen will be stirring soon, the smell of fresh bread replacing the scent of the evening. I move toward the noise of the first morning preparations. My footsteps light on the stone as I prepare to hand over my duties. The kitchen is a cavernous space, carved from the rock and timber of the keep, where the heat of the day's cooking still resides in the stones. I hang my lantern on a rusted hook, the flame flickering as it finds a new home in the corner, illuminating the soot-stained walls. The atmosphere here is thick with the scent of dried herbs and the lingering ghost of roasted meat, a sensory map of the meals that have sustained us. I move toward the great hearth, where the embers glow like a collection of buried jewels, waiting for the breath of life. I take a small bellows, the leather worn and supple from years of use, and begin to coax the heat back into the room. The wood catches slowly, the first thin wisps of smoke rising toward the blackened chimney, carrying the scent of pine and old ash. I add several logs of split birch, watching as the orange tongues of fire lick the bark, turning it to silver and then to flame. On the central table, a massive slab of scarred oak. I find the iron pots waiting for their morning burden. I carry a bucket to the well in the corner, the rope rough against my palms as I draw up the water, which is so cold it feels like liquid glass. The splashes against the stone floor are sharp, a wet echo in the quiet room that precedes the arrival of the other brothers. I fill the largest cauldron, the metal ringing softly as the water rises, and place it over the growing fire to boil. Next to the hearth, a sack of coarse oats sits slumped against the wall, smelling of the summer fields in the reach far to the south. I measure out the grain by the handful, the texture dry and dusty, a sharp contrast to the damp chill of the morning. As the water starts to steam, I stir the pot with a long wooden paddle, the motion steady and measured, a familiar task that requires little thought. The steam rises in a thick cloud, dampening my face and softening the dry skin of my forehead. I leave the porridge to simmer and turn my attention toward the heavy door that leads to the underground larders. The iron key is cold in my pocket, its weight a reminder of the responsibility I carry for our stores as the winter deepens. The door groans as I pull it open, revealing a staircase that descends into the belly of the earth, where the frost never truly leaves the walls. I descend the steps, my boots making a dull thud on the packed dirt, as the light from the kitchen fades behind me. My lantern casts a narrow circle of yellow light, illuminating the rows of barrels and the hanging carcasses of deer and boar. These are the ice cells, where the cold of the wall is channeled through the stone to preserve what we have gathered. I walk past the first row of casks, checking the seals for signs of damp or rot, my breath forming a thick mist in front of my eyes. Here the silence is absolute, a pressure that makes the pulse seem loud and intrusive in the narrow corridor. I find the barrel of salt beef I was looking for, its wood stained dark by the brine that keeps the meat from spoiling. I use a small mallet to tap the lid, listening for the hollow note that would indicate a leak, but the response is solid and reassuring. We have 10 of these barrels left, a small fortune in the eyes of a man who knows the length of a northern winter. I move further into the murk, where the walls are coated in a layer of white frost that sparkles like crushed diamonds in the lamplight. The ice is thick here, several inches deep in places, a testament to the power of the great monument that looms above us. I reach the section where the cheeses are stored, wrapped in wax and cloth to protect them from the biting chill of the cellar. I lift one, its weight substantial and comforting, and check the date marked in charcoal on the outer casing. It has been aging for 3 years, a product of the dairies in the gift, gifted to us by the farmers who still honor their ancient oaths. The wax is smooth and cold, a protective shell that guards the richness within from the harsh environment of the frontier. I place the cheese back on its shelf, making sure it is positioned correctly to allow the ambient chill to circulate around it. Every item in this room is a piece of a puzzle, a component of the strategy that keeps the Night's Watch alive when the snows are deep. I walk back toward the stairs, my lantern light dancing off the iron hooks that hang from the ceiling, empty now, but soon to be filled again. The climb back to the kitchen is slow, my legs feeling the effort after a long night of wandering the halls of the keep. Back in the warmth of the kitchen, the porridge is bubbling softly, the scent of the cooked grain filling the room with a sense of home. I take a small taste with a wooden spoon, the heat blooming in my chest and chasing away the last of the cellar's bite. It needs a little salt, which I fetch from a jar on the mantel, the white crystals stinging the small cuts on my fingers. I sprinkle it over the pot, watching as it disappears into the grey mixture, a small addition that makes a world of difference. The first of the kitchen helpers arrives, a boy from the Riverlands who still looks surprised by the frost on the windows every morning. We exchange a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the work that has been done and the work that is yet to come. I hand him the paddle, showing him the consistency of the oats, and he takes over the stirring with a practiced, easy motion. My part in this room is finished for now, and I turn my eyes toward the window, where the sky is turning a pale, watery blue. The transition is nearly complete, the quiet hours of my shift giving way to the bustling life of the castle's waking hours. I pick up my lantern, the oil running low, and prepare to make my final rounds before I can seek the sanctuary of my bunk. I walk out into the courtyard, where the ground is frozen hard, and the wind carries the sharp tang of the coming snow. The wall towers over us, a shimmering cliff of white and blue that seems to glow with its own internal light in the dawn. I move toward the stables, where the horses are already stirring, their breath rising in plumes from the wooden stalls. The smell of hay and manure is familiar and grounding, a reminder of the living creatures that depend on our care and diligence. I check the water troughs, breaking the thin layer of ice that has formed over the surface during the late hours of the morning. The horses watch me with large, dark eyes, their ears twitching at the noise of the ice cracking against the wood. I speak to them in a low voice, a murmur that is lost in the wind, but seems to calm the more restless of the stallions. They are the legs of the watch, the ones who carry our rangers into the haunted forest and bring them back. I find a brush and spend a few minutes smoothing the coat of a grey mare, the repetitive motion helping to clear my mind of the night's lingering thoughts. The texture of her hair is coarse but warm, a living heat that is a rare thing in this place of stone and ice. The sun starts to peek over the horizon now, a sliver of gold that does little to warm the frozen landscape. I leave the stables and head toward the armory, where the Master of Arms will soon be overseeing the morning drills of the recruits. The door is already unlocked, and I step inside the room that smells of oil, whetstones, and cold iron. I walk past the racks of swords and axes, their blades gleaming in the morning light that filters through the high, narrow slits. My task here is simple: to ensure the braziers are ready for the men who will spend their day sharpening the steel that defends the realm. I find the charcoal bin and fill the small iron baskets, the black stones rattling like teeth as they tumble into the metal containers. It is a mundane job, but without the heat of the fires, the oil would thicken and the metal would become brittle. I light the first of the braziers, the flame catching quickly and casting a warm glow over the nearby shields which bear the marks of many winters. The wood of the shields is dry and splintered in places, but the iron rims are polished and free of the orange stain of rust. I stand for a moment among the weapons, thinking of the hands that will hold them in the coming days. We are the shield that guards the realms of men, a phrase that feels more like a physical reality in this room than anywhere else. The morning is fully here now, the shadows retreating as the pale sun climbs higher into the sky, revealing the true scale of our fortress. I walk back out into the center of the yard, watching as the first rangers prepare their gear. Their faces are grim, set in the hard lines of men who know the dangers of the wild, but there is a quiet determination in their movements. I watch them check their cinches and their scabbards, their focus absolute as they prepare to leave the safety of our halls. I feel a sense of kinship with them, even though my work is done in the quiet corners of the keep. We are all parts of the same machine, the same pulse that keeps the watch alive through the long, lonely years of service. I turn toward the common hall, where the smell of the porridge I started earlier is now mingling with the scent of wood smoke and damp wool. The brothers are gathering for their morning meal, their voices a low murmur that fills the room. I find a seat at the end of a long bench, my body finally feeling the weight of the hours I have spent on my feet in the cold. I take a bowl of the hot oats, the steam rising into my face and warming my nose, which has been numb for most of the shift. The first bite is simple and nourishing, a reward for the labor of the night. My eyes are heavy now, the flickering light of the hearth in the common hall making it difficult to stay focused on the bowl in front of me. I finish the last of the food and stand, my joints creaking like the old timber of the keep as I stretch my limbs. I make my way toward the dormitory, the walk familiar, even in my state of exhaustion. I reach my own small space, a corner of the room that contains all of my worldly possessions, including a few spare tunics and a worn book. I set my lantern on the floor and begin to unlace my boots, the leather stiff from the frost and the damp. I pull the thick wool blankets over my shoulders, the weight of them a comfort I have sought. The world outside continues its busy pace, but here in the quiet of the dormitory, the time seems to slow down and eventually come to a stop. I close my eyes, the images of the night's work fading into a soft blur of grey and white as sleep finally finds me. The warmth of the blankets is a final sanctuary, a brief reprieve before the cycle of the watch that calls me back to the stone and the ice. I wake before the sun has fully dipped below the western horizon, the light in the dormitory a pale, watery gold that stretches across the floorboards. The atmosphere is a faint mist in the room, a reminder that the cold never truly leaves these stone walls, even in the height of the day. My breath, visible and slow, marks the transition from the warmth of sleep to the duty that awaits me. I reach for my boots, the leather cold and unyielding against my skin as I pull them on. The laces are frayed in places, worn thin by months of constant use, yet they hold firm as I tug them tight. There is a specific cadence to this preparation, a series of movements performed so often they require no thought at all. The floorboards groan beneath my weight as I stand, the noise echoing in the quiet of the room where others still slumber. I move with care, avoiding the patches of ice that have formed near the draughty window where the wind has found a way through the mortar. My cloak, a thick and weighted layer of black wool, hangs by the door, waiting to be draped over my shoulders once more. I step out into the corridor, the chill of the stone instantly pressing against my face, a sharp contrast to the lingering heat of the blankets. The hallway is narrow and dim, illuminated only by the occasional torch that flickers in the grip of a rusted iron bracket. Every footfall against the uneven floor is a measured beat in the quiet of the late afternoon. I make my way toward the lower cellars, where the stores of grain and salted meat are kept under the watchful eye of the stewards. The door to the pantry is a massive slab of oak, reinforced with bands of iron that are cold to the touch. It swings open with a low metallic protest, revealing the scent of cured ham and the earthy musk of stored root vegetables. My task today is to inventory the remaining barrels of flour, a chore that requires precision and a steady hand. I light a single candle, its flame dancing in the slight draught, and set it upon a wooden crate that has seen many winters. The flickering light casts long and dancing shadows against the walls, making the small space feel even more enclosed. I run my hand over the face of the first barrel, feeling the rough texture of the wood and the grit of the salt that has spilled onto the rim. There are 94 of these containers left, a number that seems large until one considers the hundreds of men who must be fed through the coming months. I mark the tally on a piece of parchment, the scratch of the quill, the only note in the stillness of the cellar. As I work, I think of the farmers in the gift, who labored to fill these stores, unaware of the quiet hours I spend here, counting their harvest. Their toil is the foundation of our survival, a debt we repay with our presence on the wall and our vigilance against the things that move in the twilight. The ledger is a record of more than just food. It is a testament to the endurance of the watch. I move to the back of the cellar where the sacks of dried peas are stacked, high against the damp stone. The environment here is thick with the smell of burlap and dust, a scent that I have come to associate with the safety of the keep. I check each bag for signs of dampness, my fingers searching for the soft spots that would indicate rot or vermin. Finding everything in order, I extinguish the candle and step back into the main hallway, the murk of the corridor feeling almost bright after the dimness of the pantry. I head toward the scriptorium, a place where the history of our order is preserved in ink and vellum. The stairs are steep and narrow, winding upward through the heart of the tower until I reach the heavy door of the library. Inside, the atmosphere is different, filled with the dry, sweet aroma of old paper and the faint traces of beeswax. Hundreds of scrolls and bound volumes line the shelves, their spines cracked and faded by time. I find a small desk near the hearth where a low fire still smoulders, providing just enough warmth to keep the ink from freezing in the well. I spend the next hour transcribing the notes from the morning's patrol, my handwriting slow and deliberate. The words describe the state of the trails, the depth of the snow, and the absence of any tracks near the gorge. It is mundane information, yet it is the lifeblood of our intelligence, a pulse that we must monitor with every passing day. My eyes, though tired, follow the lines of text, searching for any detail that might have been overlooked by the rangers. I think of the men who wrote these reports, their hands lightly shaking from the cold as they gripped their pencils in the field. To record their findings is a duty of respect, a way of ensuring that their efforts are not lost to the wind. I pause to trim the wick of my lamp, the small flame flaring up to illuminate a map of the haunted forest that hangs on the wall. The forest is a sprawling expanse of green and white, a landscape that remains largely a mystery despite our centuries of presence. My gaze lingers on the jagged line of the wall, a thin barrier of ice that separates the known from the unknown. I leave the library as the first stars begin to pierce the violet canopy of the evening sky, their light cold and distant. I walk across the courtyard, my boots crunching on the fresh layer of frost that has formed since my shift began. The great hall is starting to fill, with the murmur of voices as the brothers gather for the evening meal. I do not join them yet, for my duties take me toward the rookery, where the ravens are waiting for their evening feeding. The climb to the top of the tower is long, the wind whipping around the stone with a mournful tone that seems to speak of forgotten things. I reach the landing and open the cage doors, the birds stirring into motion with a flurry of black feathers. I offer them bits of dried meat, their beaks clicking against my gloved hand as they jostle for position. These creatures are our only link to the world south of the wall, carrying messages across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness. I watch them for a moment, their intelligent eyes watching me in return, as if they understand the weight of the secrets they carry. Descending from the tower, I feel the chill of the evening deepening, the temperature dropping as the sun disappears entirely. The shadow of the wall is now a measureless presence, a wall of darkness that seems to swallow the very light of the stars. I return to the kitchens to help with the final preparations for the late-night watchman. We stir the large pots of broth, the steam rising in thick clouds that obscure the faces of the other stewards. There is no talk, only the rhythmic scrape of the ladles and the crackle of the wood in the stove. This is the quiet labor that keeps the fortress breathing, a series of small acts that add up to the survival of the whole. I take a moment to look out the small window toward the north, where the horizon is a line of absolute black. The evening is fully here now, and though my body is weary, my spirit finds a strange peace in the routine. I prepare to hand over the keys to the next steward, the metal cold and familiar in my palm, as the cycle of the watch continues into the deep hours. The keys are passed, and I move toward the wormways. The cold here is different. It is a living thing that bites at the exposed skin of my neck. I carry a small lantern. its light dancing across the uneven floor of the tunnels that snake beneath the castle. These passages are quiet, save for the occasional drip of water from a melting icicle high above. I'm heading toward the stores to ensure the winter provisions are held against the creeping dampness of the thaw. My boots make a muffled thud on the packed earth, a steady measure that keeps me focused on the task. I reach the iron gate that leads to the meat lockers, the metal cold enough to sting through my thick wool mittens. The hinges groan, a long and mournful note that echoes through the silence of the underground. Inside, the atmosphere is thick with the scent of salt and cured ham, and the earthy musk of stored grain. I check the seals on the grain barrels, running my hand over the rough wood to feel for any signs of moisture. We have enough to last for many months, yet the hunger of the wall is a persistent threat that never truly leaves the mind. Every sack of flour and every cask of salt beef is a shield against the lean times that we know are coming. Moving deeper into the larder, I find the racks of dried fish, their scales shimmering like silver in the lantern's glow. I count them one by one, 42, 43, 44, ensuring the tally matches the ledger in my belt. Accuracy is the silent guardian of our survival, a duty that requires patience and a steady eye. I walk past the heavy wooden doors of the cold cells, the iron bands that reinforce them, showing signs of rust from the constant damp. No one is held here tonight, but the space feels occupied by the memory of those who have spent their final days in this frozen silence. The air here is so cold it feels brittle, as if the very atmosphere could shatter if I were to speak too loudly. I leave the stores and ascend the narrow stairs toward the maester's chambers, where the light is always the last to fade. The stone walls here are lined with shelves of time-worn volumes and scrolls that contain the wisdom of 1,000 years. I move quietly, for the maester is a man who values his rest and the stillness of his sanctuary. I pause by a shelf of scrolls that are so old. The parchment has turned the color of dried honey, and the ink has faded to a ghostly gray. These are the records of the first builders, the men who raised this barrier using tools and methods that are now lost to time. I wonder what they would think of us now, as we struggle to maintain their legacy with our dwindling numbers and our flickering lamps. The fireplace in his room has burned down to a pile of glowing coals, casting a soft amber hue across the cluttered desk. I add 2 small logs, watching as the flames catch the dry bark and begin to climb upward. The warmth is a welcome embrace after the biting chill of the tunnels, a brief respite for my shivering limbs. On the table, a collection of glass vials sits in a neat row, filled with tinctures of poppy and willow bark. I check the levels of each, noting which ones are running low, so I can inform the herbalists in the morning. These liquids are the difference between peace and agony. For the brothers who return from the forest with wounds that do not easily heal. I notice a stray feather on the floor, likely from one of the ravens, that the maester tends with such care. I pick it up, feeling its lightness, and place it on the edge of the inkwell. Even in this place of stone and ice, there are reminders of the fragile life that persists despite the harshness of the environment. My next stop is the armory, where the forge has long since cooled, leaving the smell of soot and cold steel. I walk past the rows of practice swords. their wooden blades notched and scarred from the afternoon's training sessions. The silence here is weighted, as if the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for the return of the morning's clamor. I run my fingers over the edge of a newly sharpened axe, the steel cold and unforgiving against my skin. It is a reminder of the purpose of this place, a fortress built for a war that most people south of the wall have forgotten. I check the racks of arrows, making sure the fletching is straight and the heads are securely fastened to the shafts. I check the oil lamps that hang from the rafters, making sure they are extinguished to prevent any stray sparks from catching. The shadows are long and distorted, stretching across the floor like the fingers of some immense, hidden giant. I find a certain comfort in this dimness, a sense of being protected by the very walls that I am sworn to maintain. Outside, the courtyard is a sea of grey and white, the snow falling in large, lazy flakes that disappear into the mud. I walk toward the lift, the great wooden cage that carries men to the top of the 700-foot barrier. The chains are coated in a thin layer of frost, making them look like strands of spun glass in the moonlight. I look at the counterweights, massive stones bound in iron cages that hang suspended in the dimness like giant pendulums. They are the muscle of the lift, the stored energy that allows us to defy gravity and reach the heights of the frozen rampart. I check the ropes for any signs of fraying, the hemp rough and stiff from the moisture that has frozen within the fibers. I apply a fresh layer of animal fat to the pulleys, the grease thick and pungent in the freezing atmosphere. This work is messy and slow, but it ensures the cage moves smoothly without the terrifying jerks that can unnerve even the bravest man. It is a humble task, yet it is the pulse of the castle, the link between the earth and the sky. As I work, I look up at the wall, which looms over us like a sleeping god made of ice and memory. It is a presence that never truly leaves you, a constant weight on the horizon that defines the limits of our world. Tonight it seems to glow with an inner light, reflecting the stars that have finally appeared through the breaking clouds. I move to the stables where the horses are huddling together for warmth, their breath forming small clouds of steam. I check their water troughs, breaking the thin layer of ice that has formed on the face of it so they can drink. The animals acknowledge my presence with a soft nuzzle or a low whinny, their calm energy a balm to my weary mind. I find a bale of hay that has come loose, and I tighten the twine, the rough fibers scratching against my palms. There is a simple satisfaction in fixing things, in ensuring that every part of this machine is functioning as it should. We are all cogs in a much larger gear, and if one of us fails, the whole cycle is put at risk. The late hour is beginning to press upon me, my movements becoming a little slower as the fatigue sets in. I make my way back to the kitchens, where the fire is now just a bed of embers, glowing like a dragon's eye. I take a small piece of bread from the larder, the crust hard and chewy, and eat it slowly as I sit by the hearth. The silence of the kitchen is absolute, a rare moment of solitude in a place that is usually filled with noise and heat. I think of the brothers who are out on the wall right now, pacing the frozen walkway, their eyes fixed on the tree line. Their vigil is the shield that protects the realms of men, and my work is the foundation upon which that shield rests. I pick up a broom and sweep the stray flour from the floor, the bristles making a soft, rhythmic scratching against the stone. This small act of order is my contribution to the peace of the castle, a way of keeping the chaos of the wilderness at bay. When the sun finally rises, the kitchen will be ready for the flurry of activity that comes with the dawn. I check the windows one last time, ensuring the shutters are bolted tight against the rising wind. The landscape outside is a blur of white and shadow, a measureless expanse that holds 1,000 secrets beneath its frozen exterior. I feel a sense of completion as I finish my rounds, the quiet hours of my shift coming to a gentle close. I return to my small cell, the straw mattress feeling like a luxury after the hours of standing and walking. I pull the weighted furs over my shoulders, the warmth of my own body, finally beginning to thaw the deep chill in my bones. The cycle of the watch continues, and as I close my eyes, I know that I have done my part to keep the flame alive. The distant sound of a horn, faint and lonely, signals the change of the guard on the battlements above. It is a comforting note, a reminder that I am not alone in this vigil, and that the watch is never truly broken. I drift into a dreamless sleep, prepared to wake and begin the process once more when the light of the morning returns. The fortress breathes around me, the stone and ice holding the stories of all who have served here before. I am just one more voice in the choir, one more hand at the wheel in this age-old struggle against the cold. The quietude of the late hour is a gift, a moment of stillness before the world turns its face back toward the sun, and the first light of the new day begins to touch the rim of the wall. The transition from sleep to waking is a slow, gradual climb out of the depths of the mind. In the small cell, the chill has found its way through the furs, biting at the tip of the nose and the edges of the ears. Outside, the sky is no longer the deep murk of midnight, but a bruised navy blue that hints at the coming of the light. I push back the weighted blankets, the movement stirring the scent of old straw and the faint, persistent smell of wood smoke. My boots are waiting by the stool, the leather stiff and cold, and I lace them with fingers that are still clumsy from the lingering rest. The floorboards beneath my feet are icy, a reminder that the fire in the main hall has likely burned down to nothing. I move through the corridor, where the frost on the stone walls glows with a faint, ethereal quality in the pre-dawn light. The silence of the castle is different now, less oppressive than it was at midnight and more expectant. It is the quiet of a beast that is just starting to stir before it opens its eyes to the day. In the kitchen, the embers in the hearth are still glowing, a faint orange pulse in the dimness of the room. I use a long iron poker to stir the coals and add a few small splinters of wood, watching as they catch and flare into life. The warmth is immediate, a gentle brush against the skin. As the atmosphere in the room moves into a state of renewal, I fill the large iron kettles with water, the liquid splashing with a clear metallic tone against the sides. The pump is stiff, the handle requiring a firm, steady pressure to draw the water from the deep well below. Each stroke of the handle sends a vibration through my arm, a physical connection to the earth and the hidden rivers that run beneath the ice. As the water heats, I begin the task of preparing the morning meal, the simple, honest work of a steward. I haul a sack of oats from the larder, the burlap rough against my palms, and the weight a familiar comfort against my shoulder. The grain pours into the pot with a soft sliding noise, like the movement of sand in an hourglass. I stir the pot with a long wooden paddle, the pace of my arm becoming a steady meditative measure in the quiet kitchen. The steam begins to rise, carrying the earthy scent of the grain and the faint sweetness of dried fruit that I have added for flavor. It is a humble meal, but it is the fuel that will keep the brothers warm as they face the wind on the battlements. Outside, the yard is waking, the shadows stretching and shifting as the sun climbs behind the massive wall of ice. I can hear the distant muffled noise of the gate being unbarred, the iron hinges groaning in the cold. The change of the guard is happening now, the men who have stood the watch finally coming in to seek the warmth of the fire. I think of the stewards who stood in this same kitchen hundreds of years ago, doing these same tasks with the same tools. They too watched the sun rise over the wall and felt the same bite of the wind against their faces. We are part of a long, unbroken chain, a lineage of service that stretches back to the very beginning of this age-old struggle. The stone of the castle is worn smooth in places by the passage of countless hands and the pressure of countless feet. Each mark on the wall, each dent in the table, is a story, a memory of a brother who served his time and then passed into the shadow. We are the keepers of these stories, the guardians of the mundane that allows the great deeds to be done. I take a tray of bread from the oven, the crusts golden and hard, the heat radiating from the stone in waves. The smell of fresh bread is perhaps the most comforting thing in this harsh, frozen setting. It speaks of home and safety and the small mercies that can be found even at the edge of the known world. I set the tables in the dining hall, the wooden bowls clattering softly as I place them in neat rows. The room is still cold, the air thin and sharp, but the light is growing, pouring through the high, narrow windows. It catches the dust motes, dancing in the atmosphere, turning the simple room into a hall of gold and silver. I pause for a moment, looking out at the wall, which stands like a mountain of glass, reflecting the pale colors of the morning sky. It is a beautiful, terrifying thing, a monument to the strength and the endurance of man against the measureless expanse of the north. The ice seems to glow from within, a blue fire that defies the rising sun. In the courtyard, the first of the brothers are appearing, their black cloaks heavy with frost and their faces lined with fatigue. They move toward the hall, their footsteps a dull thud on the packed snow, their eyes fixed on the promise of food and rest. I stand by the door, a silent witness to their return, a small part of the cycle that keeps this place alive. I pour the first bowls of porridge, the steam clouding my vision, for a brief, warm moment. The men nod to me as they take their food, a silent acknowledgement of the work I have done while they were on the heights. There is no need for words in this early hour, the shared experience of the cold being enough to bind us together. As the hall fills, the murmur of voices becomes a steady, low hum, a sign that the castle has fully returned to life. The fire in the hearth is roaring now, the logs crackling and spitting as they give up their heat to the room. The transition is complete. The quiet hours of my shift having given way to the bustle of the day. I find a small corner for myself and sit with a bowl of the warm grain, feeling the heat spread through my chest and belly. The fatigue is there, a dull ache in my limbs, but it is a good tiredness, the result of a job well and truly done. I have kept the flame, I have prepared the way, and I have stood my part of the vigil. The sun is fully above the horizon now, its light blindingly bright as it reflects off the snow and the ice. The haunted forest is a sea of green and grey, stretching out into the distance, a place of mystery and danger that we guard against. But for now, in this moment, there is peace and the simple satisfaction of a duty fulfilled. I will soon return to my cell to find the rest that I have earned, while the rest of the castle goes about its business. The cycle of the watch continues, a pulse that never stops, a tempo that has been set for 8,000 years. I am just one more hand at the wheel, one more voice in the choir, in this time-worn fortress. The light of the new day touches the rim of the wall, a golden crown for the King of the North. The cycle begins anew, as it has for centuries, and as it will for all the years to come, as the first light of the morning signals the start of another day of duty. Thank you for spending this evening with me. Until next time on Canon and Calm, sleep well.